In 1987, Washington had one of their most successful seasons in franchise history. Thanks to having a top 5 offense and a top 10 defense in football, they were able to win the NFC East with an 11-4 record, and more importantly, win Super Bowl 22, winning their second Super Bowl in franchise history. It was a remarkable season full of overcoming adversity, from winning with replacement players and even defeating an actual NFL team with a bunch of guys who would never play football again, to making a quarterback change during the literal final week of the season. If you want an example of why Joe Gibbs is one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport, the 1987 season showed just that, because through it all, his team emerged victorious. However, not everything was perfect in 1987 for Washington. Every champion, for the most part, has at least one flaw and one Achilles heel. And for Washington, that was their punting game. Like I mentioned earlier, Washington had a top 5 offense in football, so they could score on you at will. We saw that at the Super Bowl, when they dropped 35 points in the second quarter alone. But if they didn't score, well, they weren't exactly great at flipping the field, as you can see with all of these clips. Washington's punter in 1987 was Steve Cox, a former 5th-round pick by Cleveland in 1981, and a man who is now in his 3rd season with Washington. And after the strike was done, when Cox came back, he was one of the worst punters in all of football. Consider this. From week 7 until the end of the regular season, Cox ranked 21st in the league in yards per punt, averaging under 39 yards, or more than 2 whole yards less than the league-wide average in 1986. His net average in that stretch was under 34 yards per punt. And the most frustrating part about Cox was how inconsistent he was as a punter. There were moments where his punts would go a long way, and he boomed one over 50 or 60 yards. Heck, he had a punt that season that went 77 yards, which was the longest punt in the NFL that season. But for every one punt that he looked good, he had 3 punts that were complete shanks that went for 25 yards, or punts that would be in opposing territory and would go into the end zone for a touchback, which is something he always struggled with throughout his career. Washington didn't exactly have a ton of weaknesses in 1987, because it's tough to win a Super Bowl if your roster just has holes left, right, and center. But if there was one weakness they were looking to improve on in 1988, it was at the punter position. But at the 1988 draft, right as they were about to upgrade that position and find the man who they thought would be the punter of the future, everything changed thanks to one of the strangest trades in the history of the draft that you probably never heard of before, but deserves a deep dive today. Because what if I said that there was a trade between 2 parties that was agreed upon, and then one party backed out after the trade had already been announced? Yeah, this is an insane draft day story that deserves a deep dive nearly 4 decades later. Because this is the story behind the strangest and the craziest trade in the history of the NFL draft. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, hype up that video, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for hyping up the video, and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that opportunity almost knocked to replace Steve Cox. But before I get to that, we need some context to understand the man that Washington wanted to replace Steve Cox with in the first place. Because general manager Bobby Beathard was adamant about wanting to find a new punter. And the man that Beathard wanted to replace Steve Cox was this man right here, Colorado punter Barry Helton. Helton was arguably the best punter in college football, and might be one of the greatest punters in the history of college football, seeing as he was a consensus All-America selection in both 1985 and 1986. Over his career with Colorado, Helton averaged a whopping 45 yards per punt, which, for some perspective, was 6 yards higher than what Steve Cox was averaging after the strike. Helton had 42 net yards per punt over his 4 seasons with Colorado, and had 3 straight seasons averaging over 40 net yards per punt, which, to give you an idea of how good that was back in 1987, the Detroit Lions led the NFL that season with 37.6 net yards per punt, and they were the only team to average more than 36 net yards per punt. Helton was that good. Steve Cox couldn't flip the field, but Barry Helton most definitely could. There's a reason why Helton was inducted into his school's Hall of Fame, why he was a member of the Big 8 all-time and all-decade team for the 1980s, why he was just the second Colorado player ever at any position to be named a 2-time consensus All-America first-team selection, and why he was a 3-time member of the Big 8 all-conference first team. The man had a cannon of a leg. The man was reliable. The man was consistent. And the man was just what Washington was looking for after the inconsistent performance of Steve Cox in 1987. So when the 4th round came, General Manager Bobby Beathard had one objective and one objective only: get Barry Helton to the nation's capital. Beathard already drafted a kicker in the 2nd round, drafting Chip Lohmiller. And now, he was going to do a complete revamp of the special teams unit. We knew that Beathard wasn't exactly afraid to wheel and deal picks and be aggressive when he had to be in order to get the guy he wanted. You could count on one hand the number of first-round picks that Washington had under his lengthy tenure as the general manager. So he called up the Indianapolis Colts and proposed a deal to swap picks so that he could draft this man right here, Barry Helton. The terms of the trade were as followed. Washington would get Indianapolis' 4th round pick, which they would use to select Barry Helton. In return, Indianapolis would get a 6th round pick, and they would get Washington's 3rd round pick in 1989. It would leave Indianapolis without a 4th round pick this year in 1988, but would give them a high capital pick next year and would still leave them with the same number of picks in the 1988 class. So Bobby Beathard and Jim Irsay agreed to the terms of the trade, and that was that. Washington was about to select Barry Helton, they were about to get their punter, and Beathard was about to work his magic one more time. And if that's how the story ended about this draft right here at the 1988 NFL Draft, then let's be honest, that's not too much of a story. Draft day trades happen all the time, and there's nothing too unusual about this yet. However, you might be thinking to yourself while watching this and listening to this, wait a second, time out. I could have swore that Barry Helton was on a completely different team and that Washington never ended up taking him. I could have swore that he was the punter for the San Francisco 49ers when they won 2 Super Bowls to close out the 1980s. And don't worry, your brain is not fooling you. This is not a Berenstain Bears effect. Because as it turns out, after the league announced the trade and announced that Washington had swapped picks with Indianapolis, Jim Irsay revolted. The league literally announced the trade and Jim Irsay stood up and protested. The reason? Those weren't the conditions of the trade that I agreed to. Irsay thought that the 2 teams would also swap 4th round picks, meaning that the Colts would still have their 4th rounder while also getting Washington's 6th and while getting Washington's 3rd round pick in 1989. No sane general manager would agree to that trade, and even a guy as aggressive as Beathard wasn't going to do that and be aggressive to the point of being reckless. But it's not like Beathard tried to pull a fast one on Irsay. Jim Irsay literally agreed to the trade. Both sides were pleased with the deal, with Washington pleased that they were about to get their punter of the future, and Indianapolis pleased that they were going to get a high draft pick the following year. And then, after the trade had already been announced, Irsay balked and said that he never agreed to anything. And with the league in an absolute conundrum at this point, seeing as they had already announced the trade between the 2 sides, the league decided to call the deal off, since no one knew what the compensation was. Said Bobby Beathard on What the Heck Happened, "We didn't switch fourth-round picks. The switch was never talked about. Jim Irsay was on the phone. I repeated it to Jim. Everything was okay. He agreed to the deal and hung up. It's the strangest thing I've ever seen happen." So Washington thought that they were getting their punter. They thought that everything had worked itself out. And then, even though Irsay agreed to the deal for Indianapolis, and there seemed to be no confusion whatsoever, Irsay backed out as the trade was being announced, either because he got cold feet, because he was trying to pull a fast one, or because he was drunk and truly had no idea what he was agreeing to. Which one it was, I have no idea, and I'll guess we'll never know. But whatever the case, the trade was called off. And with that, the 49ers, who were ahead on the draft order as a result of this trade failing to go through, decided to take Helton. Washington, now without a punter, decided to take running back Jamie Morris out of Michigan with their original fourth-round pick. He didn't do much in the NFL, playing just 2 seasons with Washington and scoring 4 touchdowns on 773 yards with 6 fumbles, meaning that he had more fumbles than touchdowns. And he was out of the NFL by the end of the 1990 season after spending that year with the anemic 1-15 New England Patriots. And if you're thinking, well, maybe this was a blessing in disguise, because they found another punter who was better, and they kept their 3rd-round pick in 1989 and used that to draft someone good, well, not so much. This story does not exactly have a happy ending for Beathard and company. Washington did end up drafting a punter in the 12th round, spending their final pick on San Diego State punter Wayne Ross. However, he never made the team and never played a down in the NFL. And with that 3rd-round pick that Washington kept in 1989 and didn't give to Indianapolis, Washington took Auburn defensive tackle Tracy Rocker, who played just 2 seasons and only had 3 sacks before never playing in the NFL again after the 1990 season. Oddly enough, the most productive player as a result of this was Washington's 6th-round pick that they ended up keeping and not giving to Indianapolis, where they drafted Louisiana Monroe quarterback Stan Humphries, who, while awful with Washington, throwing 4 touchdowns and 11 interceptions with the team, eventually went to San Diego and led the Chargers to Super Bowl 29. Funny how that all worked out. The biggest beneficiary of this failed deal in the long run happened to be not Washington or Indianapolis or even San Francisco, because he only played a couple of seasons there, but rather San Diego. Talk about a bizarre butterfly effect. The Chargers were the ones that benefited the most from this failed deal between Washington and Indianapolis. What transpired at this draft right here has to be one of the strangest draft sagas of all time. To have 2 sides agree to a trade, have the commissioner announce the trade, and then for one team to back out and say that the trade never happened and that they never would have agreed to it if those weren't the terms, even though those were the terms that were initially agreed upon, is nothing short of bizarre. But that's exactly what happened in 1988, when the Indianapolis Colts told Bobby Beathard, in no uncertain terms, hold your horses. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name of the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.